Hello students, today we will start our multiplexer lessons. So what is multiplexer? Multiplexer is a combinational logic circuit and it is a selection device. That is, it will select one of many inputs and that particular selected input will be transferred to the output line without any change or without any alteration. So we can tell it is a many to one device. That means it is a selecting device. One of many inputs will be selected and that is transferred to the output line. Now multiplexer, in short, we can tell multiplexer as MUX, MUX MUX. Now see, as it is a many to one device, that means it is so it is clear that the number of inputs to a multiplexer is more than one, but number of outputs of a multiplexer is always one, right? So if this is a multiplexer or MUX, so it may have more than one input, it must have more than one inputs, but number of output is always one, right? Now how many inputs of a multiplexer can have? The number of inputs of a multiplexer may be in power of 2. That is, a multiplexer can have 2 inputs. If 2 to the power of 1, it can have 4 inputs, 2 to the power of 2. It can have 8 inputs, 2 to the power of 3. It can have 16 input, 2 to the power of 4, like that. So accordingly, a multiplexer can be a 2:1 multiplexer, 4:1 multiplexer, 8:1 multiplexer or 16:1 multiplexer. So this is called the size of a multiplexer. Okay. If it is a 2:1 multiplexer, then the size of the multiplexer is 2:1. If it is a 4:1 multiplexer, then there are 4 input lines and only one output line. Output line of a multiplexer is always 1. So it is a 4:1 multiplexer. In case of 2:1 multiplexers, there are 2 input lines and 1 output lines. In case of 8:1 multiplexer, there will be 8 input lines and 1 output lines. So what is the size of the multiplexer in that case? That is 8:1. So suppose first we start with the 2:1 multiplexer. So in case of 2:1 multiplexer, what will be the number of input lines? Number of input lines will be 2, I0 and I1, and number of output line of a multiplexer is always 1. So this is Y, or the output line of the multiplexer. Now see, what is the task of this multiplexer? 2 input line will have 2 inputs. Now the task of this multiplexer is, it need to select one input from many and that selected input will be transferred to the output line, right? Now, so how to select? Which input is to be transferred to the output line? How to decide that? To decide that, multiplexer has another type of input lines, that is called select line, right? This is select line of a multiplexer. S is select line of a multiplexer. Okay. Now see, so S, which of the inputs will be selected? That will be depending upon the input at the select line S, right? So if, now how to select? If S equal to 0, then I0 will be selected and Y will be equal to I0. So how can I write? If S equal to 0, then what is your Y? Then Y is equal to I0. I0 will be selected and that will be transferred to the output line. If S equal to 1, then I1 will be selected and I1 will be transferred to the output line. So if S equal to 1, then Y is equal to I1. Now when S equal to 0, I0 is selected and that is transferred to the output line. That means if I0 is equal to 0, then Y is equal to 0. If I0 equal to 1, then Y is equal to 1, right? Now when A is equal to 1, then I1 is selected. That means when A is equal to 1, suppose when A is equal to 1, then Y is equal to I1, right? Now what is the significance of this? Suppose your A is equal to 1, then I1, it may be either 0 or 1. Y is equal to I1. So if I1 is 0, then Y will be 0. If I1 is 1, then Y will be 1. Right? So which one of the inputs will be selected? That will be depending upon the input at the select line. The select line will decide which one of the input line will be selected, and the input at that particular input line will be transferred to the output line without any change. Right? Now, so there is a relationship between select line and input line. Now what is the relationship? The relationship is number of input line will be equal to 2 to the power number of select line. That means suppose capital N is number of select line, then what will be number of input line? Number of input line will be 2 to the power of capital N. This is equal to small n, suppose, that is equal to number of input lines. So this is the relationship between the number of select line and number of input line. If number of select line is equal to n, then number of n, that is capital N, then number of input line will be 2 to the power of n. Right? So in case of 2:1 multiplexer, we need just one select line, because in that case capital N is equal to 1. So what will be number of input line? That is 2 to the power of 1, that is 2. Right? Now in case of, suppose if we do a 4:1 multiplexer, then what should be the number of select line? In case of 4:1 multiplexer, the number of input line is 4. This is a 2:1 multiplexer. 2:1 multiplexer, that is 2 input lines and 1 output line. Now in case of 4:1 multiplexer, there will be 4 input lines and 1 output lines. So in that case, what should be the number of select line? Let us see that. Now let us see what happens in a 4:1 multiplexer. So in a 4:1 multiplexer, as the size of the multiplexer is 4:1, so obviously there are 4 input lines and only 1 output line. Output line of a multiplexer is always 1. So a 4:1 multiplexer must have 4 input lines. So there are 4 input lines. So what are the input lines? I0, I1, I2, I3, right? And only 1 output line, Y. Okay. Now in case of 4:1 multiplexer, what should be the number of select line? See, this is the relationship we have already learned. If capital A is the number of select line, then number of input line will be 2 to the power of n. Right? So in case of 4:1 multiplexer, what is the number of input line? That is 4. So 4 is equal to, what should be the capital N? So that 2 to the power of capital N is equal to 4. Obviously 2. Right? So capital N is equal to 2. 2 to the power of 2 is equal to 4. So in case of 4:1 multiplexer, number of select line should be 2. Right? As the number of input lines are 4. So there are 2 select lines, S0 and S1. There are 2 select lines. Now depending upon the select line inputs, one from the 4 input lines will be selected, one input from the 4 inputs will be selected, and that is transferred to the output line, right? So how the selection is done? Let us see. See, S1, S0. These are the 2 select lines. So what should be the output? Y, depending upon these two select line inputs. If S1, S0 both are 0, 0. Now what is the decimal equivalent of 0? 0. So if S1 and S0, if S1 and S0 both are 0, 0, then I0 will be selected and Y is equal to I0. Right? Now if both if S1 is 0 and S0 is 1, so in case of 0, 1. In case of 0, 1, what is the decimal equivalent of 0, 1? 1. So in that case, I1 will be selected. So Y is equal to I1. Now in case of 1, 0, if S1 is 1 and S0 is 0, which one should be selected? 1, 0 means it is a decimal equivalent of 2. So I2 will be selected and Y is equal to I2. That means whatever the input is given at line I2, that will be selected and that will be transferred to the output line without any change. Now in case of 1, 1, if S1, S0 both are 1, 1, then what is the decimal equivalent of 1, 1? That is 3, right? So I3 will be selected and Y is equal to I3. Right? So depending upon the inputs at the select line, the one input from 4 input lines will be selected and that will be transferred to the output line. When S1, S0 are 0, 0, then Y is equal to I0. That means I0 is selected. When S1 is 0 and S0 is 1, that is 0, 1 condition, then I1 will be selected and Y is equal to I1. For 1, 0 condition, I2 will be selected as because 1, 0 means decimal 2. So I2 will be selected and Y is equal to I2. And for 1, 1, I3 will be selected as because 1, 1 means decimal 3. So then I3 will be selected and Y is equal to I3. Right? Now we will see in case of what happens in case of 8:1 multiplexer. Right? What should be the number of select line and how, depending upon the select line inputs, the input from the input line, one input line from, in case of 8:1 multiplexer, what should be the size of MUX? 8:1. So there should be 8 input lines. So depending upon the select line input, one from the 8 input line will be selected and that will be transferred to the output line. Right? So let us see a 8:1 multiplexer. This is a 4:1 multiplexer. This is a 4:1 multiplexer. Right? 4:1 MUX. Now we will do a 8:1 MUX. See, this is a 8:1 MUX. So size of the MUX is 8:1. 8:1. So there are 8 input lines and only one output line. Right? So in this case, what should be the number of select line? We know that if capital N is equal to number of select line, then 2 to the power of capital N is number of input line. So in this case, 2 to the power of capital N is equal to 8. Right? So what should be the capital N equal to 3? Okay. So in case of 8:1 multiplexer, there should be 3 select lines. Right? So what are the select lines? Select lines are S0, S1 and S2. 3 select lines. Now depending upon the input combinations at these 3 select line, one of these 8 input line will be selected and that will be transferred to the output line. So see how the selection is done. So as there are 3 select lines, so what should be the number of combinations? 2 to the power of 3, 8. 0, 0, 0 to 1, 1, 1. So when S0, S1, S2 all are 0, 0, 0. Now 0, 0, 0 is what? Decimal 0. Then which one of the input will be selected? I0. And Y is equal to I0. So whatever the input is given at line I0, that will directly be transferred to the output line. Now when it is 0, 0, 1. So 0, 0, 1 means the decimal equivalent of 1. So I1 will be selected and Y is equal to I1. For 0, 1, 0. 0, 1, 0 means decimal equivalent of 2. Then I2 will be selected and y is equal to I2. For 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1 means decimal equivalent of 3. So then I3 will be selected and y is equal to I3. For 100, 100 is what? Decimal equivalent of 4. So then I4 will be selected and y is equal to I4. 101, decimal equivalent of 5. So I5 will be selected and y is equal to I5. So whatever the input is given at I5 line, that will be directly transferred to the output line y. For 110, that is decimal 6. So I6 will be selected and y is equal to I6. For 111, that is 111 is decimal equivalent of 7. So then I7 will be selected and y is equal to I7. Right. So depending upon the input at the select line, input combination at the select line, the input, one of many input lines will be selected and that will be transferred to the output line. This is a 8:1 MUX. The size of the MUX is 8:1, right? As because there are 8 input lines. So in case of 8:1 MUX, there are 8 input lines, 3 select lines. Depending upon this relationship, there are 3 select lines, and depending upon the select line inputs, 1 out of these 8 inputs will be selected and that is given to the output line. So this is the very basic conception on MUX, and in next class we will cover the multiplexer in detail. Thank you for watching.